The Fox News went quiet. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, the Harvard-trained Texas lawyer, leaned forward in her seat, her eyes directed straight at former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi. Bondi had just finished a lengthy critique of Crockett's legislative record on criminal justice reform, asserting, Congresswoman Crockett clearly doesn't understand how prosecutors protect communities. Bondi's confidence was unwavering as she concluded, her policies will return us to the crime-ridden days of the early 1990s. That might work in her district, but most Americans know better. But what happened next was far from ordinary. The moderator asked Crockett his question, anticipating the usual defensive reaction of these political debates. But instead of that, the Congresswoman hesitated for only a second, her face calm and firm. What she replied left all the people present in the room speechless. Miss Bondi, Crockett started, her tone clean and controlled. Prior to my election to Congress, I handled more than 100 criminal cases as a public defender and civil rights lawyer. For all those years, I never ever had to relinquish my law license for ethical infractions or be publicly chastised by the state bar. Unlike yourself. The room gasped. Bondi's face went stiff with shock, and the crowd looked visibly shaken. Crockett went on, maybe instead of questioning my knowledge of the criminal justice system, you should respond to the discipline records that show which of us has actually maintained the standards of the legal profession. It was not another political rant. It was a lesson in precision and preparation. Before we go further with this incredible showdown, go ahead and like this video and subscribe to our channel. Why? Because situations like these, genuine political power struggles, tend to fly under the radar of mainstream media, and you won't want to miss what comes next. In order to really get the true measure of this remarkable exchange, we have to go into the backgrounds of these two powerful women and the conditions that brought them to this dramatic confrontation. The history of Jasmine Crockett is one of perseverance. Following her graduation from Harvard Law School, she became a powerful civil rights lawyer in Texas. Her practice involved defending clients in well-publicized police abuse cases and serving as a public defender for those who were indigent. Crockett not only had a courtroom reputation for thorough preparation and aggressive cross-examination, which made her respected and feared by opposing attorneys. But more than anything else, she had an unshakable conviction that the law is about facts, evidence, and responsibility, not appearances or politics. When she was first elected to the Texas state legislature in 2020, Crockett didn't hesitate to employ her knowledge of the law to question candidly in committee hearings, cutting through contradictions in testimony and injecting genuine accountability into the process. By the time she was elected to Congress in 2022, she had already made a name for herself as a policy-driven leader who emphasized substance over performative politics. Crockett clarified in her initial major congressional address, the law isn't about appearances. It's about facts, evidence, and accountability. Pamela Jo Bondi, however, went about achieving recognition differently. After serving as a prosecutor in Florida, Bondi made history as the state's first female attorney general in 2010. Her tenure saw her advocating for a tough-on-crime approach, building a national profile through cable news appearances, and later joining President Trump's impeachment defense team. Bondi's media presence, combined with her prosecutorial experience, made her a formidable figure in political and legal circles. But Bondi frequently bragged about her real-world experience, asserting, "My years putting criminals behind bars gave me first-hand knowledge of what keeps communities safe." Then picture the moment when Crockett and Bondi went head-to-head on national television. The Fox News segment that put these two legal brains squarely in opposition to each other was focused on the Justice Reform Act, legislation co-sponsored by Crockett that seeks to reform mandatory minimum sentences and expand funding for public defenders. The legislation had garnered unexpected bipartisan support, even attracting endorsements from conservative legal academics alarmed by overcriminalization. Bondi, though, was on hand to criticize the bill from the prosecutor's point of view, and Crockett was on hand to defend it. But something Bondi didn't anticipate was Crockett's preparation. In the weeks leading up to the debate, Crockett's staff had done extensive research into Bondi's professional history, including court records and bar association proceedings that were rarely discussed in the media. This meticulous preparation showed that Crockett wasn't just ready to defend her legislation, she was prepared to confront any personal attacks head-on. And that's exactly what she did. What was to be another routine debate became a viral moment of political accountability. The stage was set. Fox News host Michael Reynolds presented the Justice Reform Act as a controversy-filled piece of legislation. Bondi, sporting her trademark red blazer, presented her criticism, highlighting the dangers she saw in Crockett's bill. The bill would put communities at risk and tie the hands of the very people working to protect public safety, Bondi said. She elaborated on her criticism, referencing recidivism statistics and suggesting that Crockett and her fellow Democrats were out of touch with what mattered to Americans regarding crime. But Crockett wasn't going to take any of that. When the argument turned into a personal assault on her legal experience, Crockett pulled out her well-prepared research to drop a line that left Bondi stunned, a line that went viral. Now, ask yourself, how many politicians like Crockett do you ever see prepare so well? And what do we learn from her strategy for political clashes? Be sure to tune in for part 2, where we dissect what occurred next and how it redefined the public perception of these two influential women in politics. As a woman who has spent many years prosecuting cases and serving as Florida's chief law enforcement officer, Bondi firmly established the tone for her case. She asserted that the academic model for criminal justice, such as that which is offered in Crockett's bill, just didn't fly in the real world. Bondi concluded with what seemed to be a carefully written knockout punch. Congresswoman Crockett clearly doesn't understand how prosecutors keep communities safe. Her policies would send us back to the crime-plagued 1990s. That may play in her district, but most Americans are smarter than that. As Bondi concluded her comments, the camera focused on Crockett, who kept an expressionless face, jotting occasional notes but displaying no apparent reaction to the increasingly personal tone of the criticism. What followed was anything but routine. When host Michael Reynolds directed a response to Crockett, the Congresswoman's tone was firm but measured. And what she said left Bondi flabbergasted. "Miss Bondi," Crockett started, her tone crisp and deliberate. "Prior to my being elected to Congress, I prosecuted or defended more than 100 criminal cases as both a public defender and a civil rights lawyer. Throughout that period, I never once had to forfeit my law license for ethical misconduct or be publicly censored by the state bar. Unlike yourself." The studio audience gasped. Bondi's face changed from smugness to shock. Crockett wasn't finished. To those who perhaps did not know, Crockett added, Miss Bondi was officially reprimanded by the Florida bar in 2013 for ethical misconduct in delaying an execution to fit in her political fundraiser. She was subsequently ordered to temporarily relinquish her law license due to further infractions discovered by the Bar Ethics Committee. This wasn't just a debate. This was a moment that would change how people viewed both women. Crockett didn't stop there. She seamlessly shifted from Bondi's professional record to the core of the Justice Reform Act. Now, regarding the Justice Reform Act, Miss Bondi's characterization misrepresents several key provisions, Crockett stated. The bill maintains appropriate penalties for violent offenses while addressing well-documented disparities in how non-violent crimes are prosecuted and sentenced. Crockett then methodically addressed each of Bondi's criticisms with specific provisions from the bill, citing research from both conservative and liberal institutions. She pointed out that states that have implemented similar reforms, including Texas, South Carolina, and Ohio, have seen both crime rates and incarceration costs decrease simultaneously. But then, Crockett raised the stakes even further. "I have here to support this legislation the backing of the Fraternal Order of Police, the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, and former Attorney General Michael Mukasey, who served under President George W. Bush. These aren't extreme groups or individuals. They're good voices in law enforcement who understand that our system currently has to be changed." Bondi, visibly shaken, tried to turn the topic around. "We're here to discuss legislation, not personal attacks," she stated, trying to regain her composure. "My record as Florida's Attorney General speaks for itself. These minor administrative matters have no bearing on the substance of the bill we're discussing." But Crockett wasn't going to let that slide. "With all due respect, Miss Bondi," said Crockett, "you started out this portion of your reply by challenging my knowledge and experience in criminal law and implying that my viewpoint was purely theoretical. Whenever one makes experience the basis of their expertise on a topic, the validity of their assertions regarding that experience is squarely at issue. Furthermore, ethics violations by prosecutors aren't minor administrative matters. They're fundamental breaches of the public trust that directly relate to how our justice system functions. The Justice Reform Act specifically addresses prosecutorial accountability because we've seen how misconduct can lead to wrongful convictions and erode public confidence in our legal system." By now, it was obvious to the audience, Bondi was off her turf. Usually the attack dog in these types of debates, she was now on the defensive, facing an opponent who had obviously done her research. The American people know the distinction between tough-on-crime policies and smart-on-crime policies, Crockett went on, her voice unflappable. This bill is the latter strategy, one that keeps communities safe while confronting documented inequities and inefficiencies in our existing system. It's endorsed by law enforcement experts, fiscal conservatives worried about the expense of mass incarceration, and victims' rights activists who know that justice demands better than lengthy sentences. As the segment came to a close, Crockett made her ultimate point, a remark that would resonate throughout political circles. "Miss Bondi suggested that my approach might work in my district, but most Americans know better. I'd simply note that this legislation has co-sponsors from rural, urban, and suburban districts across the country. Perhaps Ms. Bondi should consider that Americans in all communities want a justice system that is fair, effective, and fiscally responsible, not just one that sounds tough in cable news soundbites. Producers, sensing the historic moment being made before them, ran the segment past its intended length. Host Michael Reynolds, an experienced broadcaster who had moderated countless political debates, seemed momentarily at a loss as to how to respond to such a dramatic reframing of the debate. "We have about a minute left," Reynolds ultimately stated, attempting to reassert control. "Miss Bondi, your last thoughts on the Justice Reform Act?" Bondi, attempting to catch up, went back to generic platitudes regarding public safety. But she did not repeat any of the more personal attacks on Crockett. At the end of the day, prosecutors are on the front lines protecting communities. Any legislation that limits their ability to keep dangerous individuals off the streets deserves serious scrutiny. And then there was Crockett's closing argument, the moment which would be etched into history. "I've made a career in courtrooms, Miss Bondi, not simply commenting on them on TV. The Justice Reform Act is evidence-based, not emotion-based. On data, not anecdotes. I would invite a serious discussion of its provisions by anyone who has actually read the bill. What I won't stand for is misrepresentation of my experience or expertise from someone whose own legal record fails elementary scrutiny. The American people deserve better than that, both in their commentators and their justice system." As Reynolds thanked both guests, the camera caught Bondi's expression, a mixture of surprise and grudging respect, an image that would become widely shared across social media in the hours that followed. The immediate aftermath of the Crockett-Bondi exchange demonstrated the rare power of a genuinely unscripted television moment. As the broadcast went to commercial, audience members in the studio could be heard still responding, some of whom went up to Crockett to applaud her calm but gut-wrenching answer. In the background, Fox News producers gathered in the control room, aware that they had just aired something remarkable. Unlike their usual cable news segments meant to make more noise than light, this exchange included actual policy debate coupled with an honest attack on a commentator's credibility, all dispensed with the precision of a cross-examination in a courtroom, not partisan soundbite. "Just watched a masterclass in preparation versus reputation," one producer was heard saying to others. Crockett didn't arrive prepared only to debate her bill. She arrived prepared to face everything Bondi might use against her, including her own background. As Crockett left the studio, her phone was already filling with messages. Colleagues from Congress, former law school classmates, and current public defenders were sharing clips of the exchange that had immediately begun circulating on social media. Within an hour, #Crockett cross-examination was trending nationwide, with legal commentators from across the political spectrum analyzing her methodical dismantling of Bondi's arguments. Even conservative legal scholars acknowledged the effectiveness of Crockett's approach. Former federal prosecutor Andrew McCarthy wrote on National Review Online, "Whatever one thinks of the Justice Reform Act, Congresswoman Crockett demonstrated how to effectively counter criticism. Address the substance while establishing credibility." Her reference to Bondi's ethics issues wasn't a cheap shot, but a relevant response to the questioning of her own qualifications. For Bondi, the aftermath was a novelty challenge. Generally basked in praise in conservative media circles following TV appearances, she found herself instead being asked intrusive questions regarding the ethics violations Crockett had alluded to. A number of outlets that have her commentary regularly asked for responses regarding the incidents, which were not widely covered nationally while she was Florida Attorney General. Major network news programs were playing clips dissecting the exchange by that night. CNN legal commentator Jeffrey Toobin labeled it one of the best takedowns he'd witnessed in years of viewing political TV. Crockett did not become upset or combative. She just laid out facts regarding her own history and Bondi's track record and shifted seamlessly to substance. It was prosecutorial at its finest. MSNBC's Rachel Maddow began her show with a lengthy breakdown of the altercation. What we saw today wasn't great television. It was a reminder of what serious political discussion can look like when someone will not stand for mischaracterization and shows up with irrefutable facts. Perhaps most significantly, Fox News itself acknowledged the impact of the exchange. On Special Report, anchor Brett Baer noted, "A remarkable moment on Fox News today as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett responded to criticism from former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi with a surprisingly effective counterargument about Bondi's own legal record before addressing the policy substance of her justice reform legislation." For Crockett, the validation was not only from news accounts, but also from a surprise outbreak of bipartisan support for her bill. By the next morning, 3 more Republican members had become co-sponsors of the Justice Reform Act, with one informing reporters, "Following Congresswoman Crockett's step-by-step defense of the bill yesterday, I reviewed the provisions again and saw them line up with effective reforms we've adopted in my state. Law schools across the country requested permission to use the clip in courses on trial advocacy and public communications. Georgetown law professor Paul Butler told the Washington Post, "I'll be showing this exchange to my students as a perfect example of how to respond to personal attacks in a professional setting. Address them directly but briefly, then pivot immediately to substance. It's a technique that works in courtrooms, boardrooms, and apparently television studios." 3 days later, the House Judiciary Committee said it would be holding hearings on the Justice Reform Act. The week following, an accelerated schedule was directly attributed to heightened public interest. After the Fox News segment, Committee Chairman Jim Jordan released a statement in which he stated that while members of the committee might disagree about the bill, Congresswoman Crockett's support of its provisions must be taken seriously. For her part, Crockett maintained the same measured approach that had characterized her television appearance, rather than taking a victory lap. She used the increased attention to focus on the legislation itself. In her only public comment about the exchange, during a brief CNN interview, she said, "I'm pleased that more Americans are now discussing much-needed reforms to our criminal justice system. This isn't about personalities or politics. It's about designing a system that provides real justice while utilizing tax-paying resources in a proper manner." Bondi's reply a week later was in the form of an op-ed published in the Wall Street Journal entitled "Beyond Sound Bites: A Serious Discussion of Criminal Justice Reform." The article pointedly did not mention Crockett's name, but did state that recent public debate had served to bring out the imperative to fact-based discussion of how we go about criminal justice in America. The article then outlined Bondi's more nuanced position on certain reforms, including support for drug treatment alternatives and prosecutorial accountability measures, positions considerably more moderate than those she had expressed on Fox News. Legal observers recognized this shift as a tacit acknowledgement of Crockett's impact. Harvard law professor Noah Feldman wrote in his Bloomberg column, "When a person who has based a career in media covering crime on cracking down suddenly drops off a considered examination of reform policies, it indicates that they understand that simplistic stances no longer cut it in serious policy discourse." Congresswoman Crockett's strategy effectively shifted the terms of debate. The strongest sign of Crockett's triumph was presented in the invitation from the Conservative Legal Foundation, an organization generally aligned with other law enforcement stances, to introduce the Justice Reform Act at their annual conference. The executive director of the organization described the surprise invitation thus: "In spite of where one may be on particular provisions, Congresswoman Crockett illustrated command of the issues and regard for different views that deserve attention across the political spectrum." The long-term effect of the Crockett-Bondi exchange reached far beyond the short-term consequences, shaping not only the destiny of particular legislation but the larger environment of political debate regarding criminal justice reform and the way in which substantive policy controversies are handled in media environments. 3 months later, the Justice Reform Act overwhelmingly passed the House of Representatives with unanticipated bipartisan support. The 289 to 146 final vote was 64 Republicans voting with Democrats for the legislation, a degree of cross-party support that was unusually high on matters of justice. During debate on the floor, several representatives specifically mentioned how clearly Crockett had articulated the bill's provisions in her now infamous appearance on Fox News. But what made this vote so remarkable? One Republican congressman, Ohio's James Wilson, a former prosecutor, credited Crockett's influence in his speech on the floor. "I initially approached this legislation with skepticism, but after watching Congresswoman Crockett's detailed explanation of its provisions and researching the successful implementation of similar reforms in conservative states, I'm convinced these changes represent a fiscally responsible approach to justice that maintains public safety while addressing legitimate concerns about our current system." For Crockett personally, the aftermath of that confrontation made her one of the Democratic Party's best communicators on difficult policy issues. Party leaders soon had her on the list of regular talkers in debates on legislation well beyond criminal justice. The effect was not to be denied. Realizing that her lawyer's attention to detail and preparation appealed to voters of all political stripes, news organizations modified their strategy for asking Crockett questions. Producers cautioned hosts to prepare thoroughly before questioning her. A Fox News producer even sent out an internal memo, subsequently leaked to the Columbia Journalism Review, which read, "Congresswoman Crockett comes to television spots in the same measured degree of preparation with which she would approach a courtroom. Hosts need to make sure they have well-researched her positions and their own responses prior to getting involved because she always comes prepared with masterful command of the facts and her opponent's weaknesses." This reputation for careful preparation raised the level of discussion on Crockett's later media interviews. Instead of standard partisan soundbites, interviews more often contained serious discussions of policy specifics and evidence, a change that viewers commented upon and welcomed. And the ratings verified it. When Crockett was on NBC's Meet the Press 6 months following the Bondi encounter, Viewership rose by 18% above the former week, indicating a readiness of the public for more meaningful political discourse. For Pam Bondi, the experience led to a major professional realignment. Instead of curbing her media appearance, she readjusted her style to present more substance than headline-grabbing sound bites. Media watchers observed that her subsequent public appearances included more detailed positions undergirded by particular evidence, a departure from her earlier style based on broad tough-on-crime rhetoric. In a profile in Florida Politics a year after the confrontation, Bondi remembered the experience. Certainly, that conversation was an eye-opener regarding the necessity of solid preparation, particularly when talking about sophisticated policy issues. In the current information climate, you can't get away with general statements. You have to have mastery of the details and facts. I've changed the way that I've gone about advocating since then, being more substance-based and less soundbite. This evolution in Bondi's approach represented perhaps the most significant legacy of the confrontation, demonstrating that substantive knowledge and preparation could compel even seasoned media personalities to elevate their contributions to public discourse. The wider effect on political messaging emerged as other members of Congress started copying elements of Crockett's strategy. Congressional aides indicated greater focus on making sure legislators possessed mastery of both policy information as well as the profiles of opponents they would be facing in television and radio appearances. The Crockett style soon became shorthand in Washington for going into interviews with both substantive policy information and knowledge of opponents' possible weaknesses. As one senior Democratic aide explained to Politico, "We now get members ready for TV appearances the way trial lawyers prepare to cross-examine, ready for the counterpunch, having the evidence memorized, and knowing who's asking them questions." Crockett demonstrated that preparation trumps performance every time. Media training experts included the exchange in their courses, using it to demonstrate how to effectively respond to personal attacks. Democratic strategist James Carville noted, "What made the response so successful by Crockett was that she didn't become angry or defensive. She spent a moment shoring up the attack on her credentials by stating facts about her own experience and her opponent's record, and then came right back to the substance of the policy. That's a masterclass in message discipline that political communicators everywhere should learn from." The effect spilled over to the schools of journalism, too, as the exchange became a study in good interviewing and moderating. The Columbia School of Journalism created a workshop called Beyond Gotcha, enabling in-depth policy conversation on television, and employed the Crockett-Bondi exchange to demonstrate how such discussions could be raised above ad hominem while still permitting accountability. Most important perhaps, the encounter shaped how criminal justice reform was framed on all media platforms. The detailed, fact-based methodology that Crockett had set out initially served to shift coverage from emotive anecdotes to more substantial analysis of results, expense, and effects across the various communities. Key news outlets started providing in-depth analysis of criminal justice reforms enacted across different states, including successful methods used by both Republican and Democratic administrations. This more detailed reporting opened the door to bipartisan cooperation on an issue that previously had been submerged in partisan posturing. 2 years later, the face-to-face clash was itself an oddity, Crockett and Bondi serving together on a bipartisan commission tasked with crafting federal standards for prosecutorial behavior and accountability. Both were appointed to the commission at the same time, and the commonality was itself a testament to how their televised debate had changed criminal justice talk from ideological posturing to reality-based policymaking. At the first public hearing of the commission, Bondi recognized the journey. "Congresswoman Crockett and I clearly came at these matters from different angles initially, but we had a lot of common ground. The principle that our justice system should be both effective and fair. Our cable confrontation, though awkward in the moment, ultimately served to promote a more serious national debate about these fundamental issues." Crockett's reply illustrated the emphasis on substance rather than personality that had been present throughout her campaign. "What it is about is not who prevails in a debate, but whether or not we build a justice system that actually delivers on its promises to all Americans. I thank Ms. Bondi for being willing to listen to evidence and experience from all corners of the ideological spectrum as we strive towards achieving that goal." This transformation from testy confrontation to productive collaboration perhaps best summarized the enduring legacy of their encounter. Amidst an era too often defined by performative politics and partisanship posing, Crockett illustrated that serious knowledge, careful preparation, and a commitment to accountability could not only succeed in the moment but reshape the debate regarding central policy matters. As Yale law professor James Forman Jr. noted in his examination of the commission's work, the Crockett-Bondi standoff might have been another viral moment in our polarized media universe. Instead, it became a catalyst for more serious grappling with tough issues of justice and accountability. It showed that when we raise our public debate above partisan slogans to experience and evidence, we open up possibilities for constructive forward movement that cut across political divisions. For ordinary Americans tired of the generally shallow character of TV political debates, The Clash Turned Cooperation provides a striking alternative, a template for how public discourse can educate instead of enrage, enlighten instead of entertain, and ultimately benefit the democratic process instead of merely producing ratings. If you enjoyed this analysis and would like to see more in-depth deconstructions of turning points in politics, be sure not to forget that subscribe button. Stay ahead of the curve and stay in the conversation. Your support brings us closer to continuing to bring more interesting, fact-driven conversations to your timeline. Subscribe today, and let's get deeper into the issues that matter most.